Welcome to the journey of an aesthete, a comprehensive examination of all things aesthetic, the arts, the humanities, and what it means to be human. Dmitri Matheny.
How are you, brother?
How are you doing? It's been a long time, huh?
It's been a minute. Can you hear my dog barking?
Yeah.
I think Sassy's about to take her out, so she shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, so so the dog is named after Sarah Vaughan?
No, my girlfriend's name is Sassy, and the dog's name is Scout.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I want to introduce you just a little bit, say a few words, if you don't mind. This is Journey of an Aesthete, and this is a podcast dedicated to all of the arts in a most comprehensive fashion. And I feel really honored to have on the episode today the great Dmitri Matheny. Dmitri Matheny is a Flugelhornist par excellence, brass player. He's also a very fine composer and educator and all-around musician. And I've known you for 30 years? When did we first meet?
Let's see. We met when I was 16, 17, and I'm 54 now, so you do the math. It's been a while.
I'm 50
for a good long time.
I'm 52.
Yeah. So we met at Interlochen.
Yeah.
And that was, how many years ago, man? A long time.
That was in the early 80s. So, I like to always do on my show, I don't know if you've listened to any episodes or not, but I always like to do a kind of a linear chronology.
Yeah.
Starting from the beginning and in hopes that out of that linear chronology, nonlinear things, which can be most interesting, will start to happen. Things will start to come into your consciousness. And
I like it. I have dipped around in your podcast, listened to a little bit of several different episodes.
Okay.
Very much enjoyed the world traveler and the consummate musician.
Oh, yeah.
I like your theme song very much, and I've already learned something, which is the correct pronunciation of aesthete.
Yeah.
Turns out I've been mispronouncing that word my entire life.
Okay. What were you saying before?
Something Southern that I'd rather not get into.
Well, the South is good. So I'm glad you like the theme song because I wrote that, of course.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful.
I mean, I'd like to try, part of my musical style is to do things that are, purposely reminiscent of what we might call stock figures or popular things.
That's right.
Rather than shun those things, you utilize them in music. But getting back to you, you've been doing that in your own music, but I don't want to get too far ahead. Do you want to go back and talk about Interlochen or talk about earlier in Tucson, Arizona? Or I know that
Interlochen is a nice place to start because it was the first time I ever encountered, people my own age who loved art and music like I did. Mm-hmm. I always felt like kind of a strange kid, because I wasn't into football and the hunting and the fishing and the kind of stuff that my friends were into, in the deep South, mm-hmm. In Tennessee and Georgia and also in the lonesome desert in Arizona. Mm-hmm. I had found a few friends, a few like-minded friends that were into jazz in Arizona, and we were doing what we could, basically, studying with the one jazz musician in town and trying to figure out the nomenclature and listening to records and then kind of getting together in my buddy's garage and trying to play. But it wasn't until I came to Interlochen that I found out, that there were actually kids my age that were as deep into music and everything as I was. And that just changed my whole worldview. It really opened up my eyes. And so I'm tremendously grateful for that period. And one of the first people I met was you. You were down the hall from me mm-hmm. in our dorm, and man, I instantly took a liking to you.
Well, that's great.
I really did, man. Because I loved your sense of humor. I loved your obsession with the 1970s television detective crime dramas. We kind of bonded over that, and music, of course.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I remember that time very well. I'm looking at a picture. Do you know this newspaper clipping that says Chevy Man from the 70s? And who is that now? This is some kind of used car salesman, correct? That you're standing next to?
Yeah, I believe his name was Tommy Stubbs.
So Tommy Stubbs is a car salesman.
Yeah.
In Tucson, and this newspaper clipping is that you won some sort of award or something, and it's like he has a.
All right, Mitch, you are really. You're getting deep into my origin story here. Check this out. I was a paper boy in an apartment complex. I delivered newspapers to all the people in this apartment complex where I lived. And do you remember the March of Dimes telethon, the March of Dimes walkathon?
Absolutely.
All that stuff.
Of course.
Yeah. So the deal was if someone would sponsor you for a dime a mile, and you'd walk all the thing, then they'd pay the money, and it would go to the March of Dimes. And then for every page of sponsors that you filled up, your name would go into the drawing for these prizes that they would have. Mm-hmm. And so I had this idea that I would get all my customers to sponsor me in the March of Dimes walkathon. Mm-hmm. Because I wanted to win the third prize, which was a stereo with an 8-track player.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I wanted a stereo, so that I could listen to my records, in my room, in my little den of iniquity. At
that time, were you more into Bill Chase and Maynard Ferguson and
You know too much, man.
Were you listening to like Conquistador or Jay Chataway's writing? Like,
my goodness, I was all about Bill Chase.
Yeah.
Yeah. Open up wide.
Open up wide and close up tight. or to quote the man himself, our songs are about sex. Didn't he say that in the?
Oh, absolutely.
At Faces, I think.
If you take a close look at Tommy Stubbs, he could almost be a member of the Bill Chase band. A little bit. If you take off that tie and.
Do you think Tommy Stubbs got his ties from the same place that Peter Brockman?
Almost certainly he did. Yeah. So you're gonna alienate your audience with this insider stuff, Mitch.
I'm sorry.
Peter Brockton.
Peter Brockton was a great music director.
But anyway, so long story short, I was only 12 years old, but I got a phone call that I'd won the grand prize, which was a Chevy Chevette.
Wow.
And of course I couldn't drive it. I didn't have a driver's license. I was just a kid. And so Tommy Stubbs made a deal with me that he would allow me to sell it back to him at cost, at his whatever it was, the wholesale price or whatever, and I could keep the cash.
Yeah.
And I put it in the bank, and that's how I paid for my experience at Interlochen.
That's a great story.
Yeah, so it sort of actually ended up kind of connecting to the thing. But yeah, I hadn't really thought about that in a long time, man. But that was, I love that picture though, because it's so of the era.
Well, that picture is, of course, in my special file that I have. I mean, I have a 70s museum. I often think that I want to print that picture out and have it in my 70s museum. But
my understanding is that you started with a file and now you basically have an entire museum.
Yeah, I have a entire. I mean, as you know, I have a Dick Van Patten's signed 8 is Enough cast
oh my goodness.
picture, and I've got all kinds of things like that.
Wow.
I've got Fast Break, the soundtrack from Fast Break with Gabe Kaplan, and this is all. I've got basically every book ever written on Est and Werner Erhard, and I've got but I've also got musical things too, a lot of musical things.
Yeah, of course.
And but I'm really interested in your tone production. For listeners listening about music, tone and changes in rhythm are 3 so important. And you're known for your sound, your tone, beautiful, just beautiful sound. I mean, I don't want to get too far ahead, but you developed that over some time. And so I guess when you were in Interlochen, you were more into some more commercial brass music, right? You might say a big band.
Well, I had to kind of go back and learn rudiments. I mean, I did study in school and I did have a private teacher, but prior to Interlochen, they weren't great. And while I was there, I don't know if you remember this, but Mr. Lindenau there, mm-hmm. John Lindenau, he changed my embouchure. Mm. So when I got there, I had a range of about 3 notes because I completely started over. Mm. And then also it was customary back then. I don't know if it's still this way at Interlochen, but they were telling me, man, what are you working on? Oh, I'm working on this, Clifford Brown solo. Well, you really need to work on the Hummel. You need to work on the
Hummel trumpet concerto. Yeah.
Yeah. And they were very, very into this idea that, not just that you would be classically trained, but until you've mastered certain rudiments, of the instrument, you really shouldn't be messing around with things like improvisation and syncopation and all of that. So, mm-hmm. That was a deep time for me. I mean, I did kind of immerse myself in it. And the main thing in hindsight that really inspired me was all the other musicians that were there, mm-hmm. people like yourself, and also the artists and dancers, and just the level of dedication, not just among the faculty, but among the students. It just knocked me out. I'd never experienced anything like that.
Yeah, it was like a utopia in a sense at that time. For me, it was. But for those that don't know, Interlochen Arts Academy has, much like my podcast, very similar theme of all the arts. Like you said, there were poets there and people doing woodworking and ceramics and ballet dancers and all kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you're developing your embouchure, and of course, this is some time before you meet and study with Art Farmer, right?
Yeah,
that's
absolutely,
much later. Yeah. So we want to sort of build up to that, I guess, or what happens after Interlochen
Well, while I was at Interlochen, I don't know if you recall, but I came there in what would have been my junior year of high school. And I just fell in love with the place. Like you say, it was a utopia, I mean, the whole thing, man, the seasons. And I had been living in Tucson, Arizona, and I had never experienced, just walking through the snow in a pine forest, to an icy lake. And just the whole thing was just magical to me. And I wanted to stay. Yeah. And because I had, I hadn't been, long story short, in order to stay, I needed to graduate from high school and then come there as a post-grad.
That's right.
Because I wasn't able to just transfer my credits and graduate with everybody. And so I graduated from high school a year early. I went back to Arizona and took all the tests and everything. Got my high school diploma, and then came to Interlochen for what would have been my senior year of high school, but then was actually a post-grad year.
Right.
And I spent that year at Interlochen. And that's when I first started falling in love with, all of these, all of our heroes, right. People like, like, Miles Davis and Freddie Hubbard and Art Farmer and Chet Baker, and, and I credit Tom Knifick with a lot of that. Tom, I think it was his very first teaching position. Yeah. He was a bassist and jazz musician and classical chamber music player. And he was the one who kept sending me to the listening library and saying, you need to listen to this and you need to check out that. Yeah. And that was the early days of their jazz program. They have a much more developed program now, but I don't know if you remember that listening library.
I remember the listening library very well because I listened to music there. It's one of the few places I can listen to music.
Yeah, and it was astonishing what they had. I mean, they had quite a collection in there. I first discovered Booker Little in that listening library, and that just changed completely turned me around.
So were you listening to The Thing to Do, or what? Was The Thing to Do? Yeah. I imagine you probably listened to Clifford Brown and Max Roach sides of it as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And Tom would point things out to me, like he would say, like, now listen on Pin Up House, Clifford Brown, he finishes his solo, and then Sonny's got to come in and play after that. And what's he going to play? And Sonny's, this completely, and he's like, sometimes the thing to do is the opposite of what's going on. It's just like counterpoint, Right. And I mean, I think about those kinds of lessons all the time. And these are the kinds of things I learned at Interlochen. And I really love that place. I've been back a couple of times. And it's interesting how little it has changed. I mean, it's grown and they have new buildings and new facilities, but it still has that kind of utopian, idyllic, atmosphere. Yeah. I dig it. And so while I was there, there was a guidance counselor that pulled me into the office and said, where are you going to go to college? And I said, I don't know. And she goes, well, you haven't thought about it? And I was like, well, I guess I'll go to the University of Arizona. It's in my hometown. And she said, well, do they have a good jazz program? And I said, I actually have no idea. And then she said, well, who have you auditioned for? And I said, I didn't even know that was a thing. And she said, well, what are your SAT scores? And I said, what's that? Right. And so basically, while I was at Interlochen, I had to do all the things that, that one does. Yeah. And so she actually got on the phone and called around, and she got off the phone. She said, okay, you need to audition for, Miami and North Texas. And we have a relationship with DePaul in Chicago, and they've got a good program. And so basically they ended up helping me put together an audition tape and do those auditions when the people came to the school, and take my SATs and prepare. And at the end, I had a few different scholarships in different places I could have gone to school. And do you remember Kenny Werner and Billy Drews and those guys came?
They came to visit. They came to visit, yeah.
Yeah. And so they were there, and we had the opportunity to talk to them. And I asked them, I was like, well, should I go to North Texas, or should I go to, the University of Miami, or should I go to Berkeley, or should I go to Eastman or Manhattan? Like, where should I go? And they said, well, it was actually Kenny Werner who said, well, all of these are good programs and they all have good teachers. But do you really want to spend the next 5 years of your life in Denton, Texas, or Coral Gables, Florida? You should go. He said you should go to a culturally precious. That was the words he used. Culturally precious. You should go to Chicago or New York or Boston, somewhere where you can immerse yourself in the arts and really that, because that's where you're going to live.
That's really interesting, because you went to Berklee College of Music, right?
I did.
And I went to New England Conservatory of Music. Yeah. And we went there, I think, at roughly the same time. Both in Boston. Here's a piece of trivia about my own schooling. I was the only person, this would have been 1980, what was it, 85? 6? I don't know, somewhere in there, 6.
85.
I was the only person in the freshman class to pass out of English 1.
Wow.
On the strength of my essay.
Wow.
I wrote an essay that just blew away the faculty at NEC, and my essay was on the long-term social historical effects of this new thing called the computer.
Ha! That's interesting.
And I wrote on that, and they said all these other essays are from, they're music majors. They're about the new Coke. Because the essay question was name some innovation that's going to be very significant. Yeah. And I guess some students actually wrote on the new Coke or something, or the old Coke, or unbelievably. But I wrote on the computer. It seemed commonsensical.
Wow. Well, so when we were in Boston, I don't know if you had this experience or not, but I felt like a lot of the New England students were hanging out at Berkeley and vice versa. Yeah. So there seemed to be kind of a cross-pollination there. Yeah. And of course now Berkeley has, merged with Boston Conservatory, and they're buying up all this real estate down there, and it's actually a college campus now. When I was there, they didn't have a blade of grass. At least not of the. Anyway.
Dmitri, do you have your Flugelhorn there?
I do, but it's in its case. Okay. Yeah. You want me to get it out?
Well, eventually, because I have in front of me the lead sheet of our long-term project, and it has your name at the top. It says Dmitri Matheny. Oh, wow. And I've got this lead sheet here with all these measures, and the music is so basic, you will just hear it. And I thought we could do a free improvisation on it. I'm just preparing the audience for the warm sound of Dmitri Matheny. But not just yet. I guess we'll talk some more. And is there anything else?
We should postpone that. Actually, I've got a student named Ruben Delgado who's works on instruments, and he's got my horn, and I have a loaner from him that's not in the best shape. And so I didn't know we were going to play today. However, I should have it back in the next few days, and if you want to do that at that time, I would love to.
So you don't want to use this other horn?
I'd rather not.
Okay. That's fair. We'll schedule a time to do that, and we'll.
Yeah, but I would like to do it.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. So it'll be on your horn. Yeah. Everybody needs an anchor in life. You, me, just everybody. Anchor made this whole show possible. I'm immensely grateful to them. You too can use Anchor to make your own shows and create your own vision. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Is there anything you want to say before Art Farmer enters your life, or about Art Farmer? Would you say it's a significant development?
Well, just this, that when I was about ready to graduate from Berkeley, which would have been 1989, I was kind of scared. I was kind of, you and I had the jazz sextet together.
Yeah, we played in a jazz sextet together all over town.
That's right. And we were working quite a bit. Yeah. But between that and playing in, a big band with Rob Sheps and those guys, and playing in a little Latin group and doing community theater, pit orchestra kind of stuff, plus working as a room service waiter and working in a bookstore.
I know that you worked at the Sheridan Commander.
That's right.
And I if you have any stories you want to share about that experience with our audience, you certainly can. Okay. It's up to you. Yeah. And I know, and I remember very well you played a gig with the Temptations, right?
Yeah. So there was, they had a contractor in town that would hire us, to play in the horn section behind different people that would come through town. So I was working, but I didn't really like my approach that much. Huh. And also I wasn't really making a living. I mean, I was getting paid, but I was, it was a struggle to pay my rent every month. And I was kind of concerned about it. Like, what am I going to do? Plus I had this idea that Boston was really dominated by the musicians who are either students or faculty at those two schools, at New England and Berkeley. And that if I wasn't going to be a teacher at one of those schools, and I was no longer going to be a student, it sort of effectively means you're kind of out of the loop. Mm-hmm. And so I found myself thinking, well, so do I want to stay in Boston or do I want to go somewhere else? And I didn't know where I wanted to live. And I was just had sort of a general feeling of trepidation about starting my life and my career. And
may I ask you a technical question? It's on topic. Sure.
Yeah.
You were playing some really, I'd imagine, some written parts and horn sections that we might associate with Al Jarreau's group in the mid-'80s or Jerry Hay.
Yeah.
Is there anything stand out to you about some of the charts you were doing or anything that you want to say about that? Because I don't know what you came across or what you were playing.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you mentioned the Temptations, if you think of that music, I mean, that music has live horns with written parts, and people, when you sing, it's almost like secondary melodies. You think of the song and you think of the lyrics being delivered by the vocalist, and then you immediately start thinking of the little horn figures that come in. That's true with Stevie Wonder's music. It's definitely true with Al Jarreau's music. It's something that's being lost in a lot of contemporary music, this idea that the bass motion is also a melody and the horn parts are also a melody. And I feel like
you're talking about the loss of counterpoint and the loss of
Yeah, and the sort of contour, the melodic line, in all these different aspects of the music, and I came to love that, and it's actually part of what I grew to love about Art Farmer, because no one had a sound like him or a command of melody the way he did. Both the written line and the improvised line is just melodically so absolutely strong and solid. So if we're talking about Art Farmer, I want to mention, of course, the Azure album. Yeah. Which is a masterpiece. Absolutely. With Fritz Power. Yeah. Did you hear that before you studied with him or around this? I mean, I think you actually introduced me to that album. Oh, okay. If I recall. That would make sense. Yeah. While we were in Boston, I just fell in love with his recordings and started, I actually started kind of mimicking him as best I could. And there was an album he made called Warm Valley for Concord. Yep. And they had printed his address on the back of the album. He lived in Vienna, Austria. Right. He was lucky he didn't live in Boston, because I would have gone to, his doorstep like a crazy person. But that's very common in the 70s and 80s to have very homespun albums like that. Right. In a way, wouldn't you agree that records were an art form, a handcrafted art form? Oh, yeah. I mean, for example, I have a Nat Adderley album, or all those albums that artist music or creative house music with Charlie Hayden and Hampton Hawes. Yeah. And when you buy a Hampton Hawes Charlie Hayden album, there'll be like an illustration, there'll be a watercolor painting. There'll be, a Thad Jones, Mel Lewis record will have a transcription of Jerry Dodgen's solo on Central Park North, and or Polaroid photos, candid Polaroid photos from their lives on the inside. When you'd open up the panel, it's remarkable. So I started sending him these cassette tapes of me trying to play along with him. Wow. And then writing. I would write, Mr. Farmer, in bar 9, there's a B flat in the melody, but you played a B natural. Did you do that on purpose, or was that? Did you? And then you play this line behind Jerry Mulligan, and did you make that up, or did you guys work that out in advance? And I was obsessed. And of course, I never heard back from him. I never got a letter, never got any response. But I kept sending these tapes and these letters into the ether. And then there was a session at school, and I met this bass player, Peter Herbert. Oh, yeah. And Peter came over to me and he was like, hey, you like Art Farmer? And I was like, yeah, I do like Art Farmer. And he goes, yeah, would you like to meet him? And I said, well, what do you mean would I like to meet him? Of course. I mean, I've got all those recordings. I love him. I loved him. But why would you? He said, well, because I'm his bassist and we're playing at the Village Vanguard, and would you like to come with me and I'll introduce you, So may I ask you? I'm guessing that Cedar Walton or Fred Hirsch would have been the pianist in it. It was Fred Hirsch. Yeah, that's right. It was Rufus Reed, Akita Tana. Of course, yeah. And man, what a band! Well, that was a great era in music. It really was. That whole era, there's all this stuff that's coming out, these bootlegs of the mid '80s, late '80s, and you can hear basically Michael Brecker and Don Grolnick, right, with Will Lee. Yeah. And the music is just so versatile. They do a funk piece, they'll do a swinging piece that swings. Yeah. It's just and that was part of that mix, right? That was that whole Sweet Basil and Vanguard and that whole period. Right. Well, all those musicians came through the 70s. They had careers in the 70s. Yeah. And there was sort of in the 80s, there was sort of a return to straight ahead jazz.
Right.
But a lot of them had made many great recordings that were kind of funky. There's the whole CTI thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, Art Farmer is no exception. He made a bunch of those records too. And so they have this underpinning, even when they're playing something straight ahead and swinging, there is a kind of a flavor that they have because they remember the 70s.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask you, go back further in time. When you talked about Jerry Mulligan and Art Farmer, or asked, were you thinking of the Johnny Mandel "I Want to Live" soundtrack?
Yes,
you were.
Yeah.
So it's Susan Hayward.
That is the best, man, and that's a great film. It's
a wonderful film. It's a deep film about the death penalty and about survival and politics.
And her performance is just it's arresting.
Would you say so? If the audience that doesn't know, was that an innovative score? Was that the first Hollywood score?
Definitely, and it's also one of those great confluences of film noir and jazz. There are like 5 or 6, maybe a dozen films that when you think of jazz and film noir, and that's one of them.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great one. Yeah, for sure.
So you got to meet. You went to the.
I got to meet Art Farmer, and I spent the next 10 years, kind of following him around like a puppy.
Wow.
And taking lessons and carrying his case and pestering him with questions and he really made a big difference for me because he made me believe that it was possible to do this for a living.
This is my city, a faraway city on a lost peninsula at the edge of the world. A tragic, romantic city of secret hopes and deadly dreams. A city so heartbreakingly beautiful, anyone who doesn't love it is either too sane or too sober. Herb Caen calls it Baghdad by the Bay. Eddie Muller calls it the Noir City. Tony Bennett calls it America's Paris. I call it home. It's springtime in San Francisco, and a chill is in the air. That's the chill of your own mortality, sneaking up on you from the shadows, like the sound of a saxophone under a street lamp in the fog. Out there in the night are 1,000 crime scenes. People are bruised up, beat down, hurting, hungry, and desperate. In the distance, the banshee wail of a police siren rises and falls. This is our city, no worse than any other. It's lively and lusty and full of pride, yet lost and lonesome and full of pain. It all depends on where you sit and what you need. Me, I need a drink. I need a vacation. I need a winning ticket and a new point of view. But what I've got is a coat, a hat, and a horn.
but also he was an eminently practical, straightforward person. You know, I remember I took all these music business classes at Berklee, and it all seemed very kind of, I don't know, the Harry Fox agency and the, ASCAP and BMI and residuals and contract negotiation, all this stuff. And I'm thinking, how do I get this bartender to listen to my demo tape? That was the kind of stuff I would, how do you get a bass on an airplane?
Yeah, very practical questions.
And the practical kind of stuff.
And actually, those questions aren't really necessarily practical. They actually have, I believe, transcendental implications.
How so?
Well, because if you can't get a bass on the airplane, the gig won't happen and the music won't happen.
You got that right.
So what that means is that the things that we think of as practical actually are also lofty, is what I'm saying. I mean, it's just a theory to
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So I don't know, but I want to hear some stories. Did you get to meet Cedar Walton at that time?
I never met Cedar Walton. After I started recording for Monarch, he was one of the star artists that was on that label, and so I got to hear him a few times, in these. But and I would say I met him in the sense of, "Hi, how are you? I'm Dmitri," but I never actually got a chance to talk to him or get to know him. But I certainly loved his music.
I mean, I only ask about him because he was a fairly regular pianist with Art Farmer. I don't know, you were following Art Farmer around. I don't know who.
Yeah. Well, in those years, it was a lot of Fred Hirsch, and then after that, it was almost always Jeff Keezer.
Ah, I see.
Yeah.
I see. Just what comes to mind when you think about studying with Art Farmer? Things he talked about, things he liked or disliked, things that were important to him. Just anything. I mean.
Okay. Well, musically, he was a master of melody. And he believed that melody is the soul of a song. He would say, there's melody, harmony, rhythm, form, phrasing, nuance, articulation, intonation, but melody above all. Melody comes first. Melody matters most. If I wasn't playing a melody, he would stop me and say, "What are you doing?" And I would say, "I'm improvising." He goes, "No, you're not. You're playing some pattern that you've practiced. Play a melody, and play from the heart and play like you mean it." That kind of thing.
Wow.
And what was interesting about it was, I don't know about NEC, but at Berklee, they've kind of codified this whole, Monday morning quarterback kind of like, you transcribe, Mitch plays a solo and we really like the solo. So we transcribe it and then we go, look, here's this thing he plays. He starts on the natural 9 and then he plays this descending bebop scale. Let's take that and let's learn that in all 12 keys.
Yeah, that's right.
And plug it in whenever we see this chord change. And that was a lot of what I had studied in school. And
I never learned this music that way at all.
Well, I think you're fortunate.
I mean, I actually partly because I don't really understand. I don't hear music that way.
Yeah. Well,
I hear music in more. It's complicated. Like I hear more. For me, it's more about the overall.
Yeah.
So it's more about the tonality you're in and the key and things like that.
Right. Well, you have that in common with Art Farmer. I mean, he was very much that way. Now he practiced every day, and he practiced etudes, and he practiced chord scales and all that stuff. But if I'd ask him, I was like, hey, can you play C sharp diminished on an A7 flat 9? He would say, stop thinking that way. There's one scale. It's a chromatic scale. You can play any note you want,
Yeah.
And that blew my mind because,
Well, in that sense, he's very similar to Hal Galper, right?
For sure.
Because Hal Galper says that chord scale theory is bogus. He called it bogus or...
Yeah.
Because music is about melody.
Hal Galper would say that, but then you check out some Hal Galper. He's using chord scale theory. He's using it, but maybe he's being taken there by his ear.
It's all the ears. Yeah, it's all the ears.
Yeah. So that was really Art's method and his wisdom was this kind of listen and react, being in the moment and trying to play melodically. And then the other thing about him was that he had this really. It actually, he grew up in Phoenix, and he had this kind of Southern. I don't know how to say it. There's a certain kind of straightforward but colorful worldview that he had. There were things he used to say. Like I remember one time I asked him what the secret to band leading is, because he would live in Vienna. He'd come over and he'd have like a a reunion thing with the jazz tet, or he'd have he'd go out to San Francisco, for example, and he'd play with a San Francisco rhythm section.
That's right.
And yet they would always sound great. And the bands would sound polished and swinging and together. And I was like, how do you do that? Because you're not, it's not always like the quintet on the tour bus.
Yeah, no. So basically, they're not rehearsing; they're doing it on the
right. They do it as a sound check, and how is that possible? And I asked him that 2 or 3 different times, and I got 2 or 3 different answers.
Oh, wow.
One about preparation, and one about the book, and having sketches, but not being married to them and letting people do what they do. But one time he said, "Dmitri, if you find you're the smartest cat in the room, you're in the wrong room." So his whole thing was like, hire the best people and surround yourself with great people, and then just kind of let them do what they do and get out of their way. Which is something that I've taken very much to heart.
Right. Do you share some of these things when you speak motivationally, or?
I try to. Yeah. One of the things that's challenging about that is that sometimes the people aren't ready for that kind of thing, and you don't want to contradict what they're studying in school. If you go visit a college or a conservatory or something and do a workshop, there are. You don't want to tell people that there's only one scale, and it's the chromatic scale. You got to stay away from that. But the idea that there are some tried and true techniques of being a band leader and making a living in this music. That Great Day in Harlem picture.
Yes.
At the top of the pyramid, in the very back, in the middle is Art Farmer.
That's right.
And I asked him about that. I was like, why were you standing there? And he said, because I got there early. And then he said, if you're on time, you're late.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I try to show up early for things, but that's me. It's interesting.
Yeah.
So you learned that from him, huh?
Well, yeah. I mean, I probably learned as much from him about life as about music. And I'll also say this, that there were some things he said to me then, that I didn't quite get. And then I'll think of them now and go, oh, that's what he meant by that,
Give me an example of one of those things, if you don't mind.
Okay. I was asking him about managers and agents, and stuff like that. And he's like, well, you should surround yourself with people that you trust. And it might just be 1 or 2 people. And he says, if you can find somebody, that you really trust, that's gold in this business, And I was like, well, what if, when you reach a certain point, but the reason I asked him is, he had this long relationship with Helen Keane, and you look at his career, and he's on 40 different labels, and he's had, major labels and independent labels and little homespun records and off and on, and all this stuff. But all through it, there was this sort of through line of, he would continually collaborate with Fritz Power, and he had Helen Keane in his corner. So he basically said that, he put a positive spin on it, but that most people can't be trusted. And that if you find someone that you can trust, you stay with them no matter what. You have ups and downs. You don't, when you go up, you don't upgrade and get a big manager, get a big powerful agent. You stay with the person that's been there with you from the beginning. That's, and another thing was about, like, when you're negotiating something, if you have the opportunity to get your fee and get paid your fee, as opposed to the promise of big residuals later on, take the fee.
Sure.
If you have some composers or publishing rights, don't give them away to a label, hang on to those. And I actually messed that up. I ended up giving away some music that I shouldn't have given away. And so that, there's a certain wisdom that the old cats had. Oh, yeah. That's also getting lost. And another one that I didn't quite get was about lyrics to ballads. So Art and his contemporaries, they would learn the lyrics to a song. They didn't, Art never sang,
no,
as far as I know.
Well, that was the rule. Like, I think Jimmy Heath and Ben Webster said that. Learn the and of course Dexter Gordon was always.
Yeah, well, Dexter Gordon I know would famously recite lyrics before he would play the ballad. Mm-hmm. But I remember we were working on Polka Dots and Moonbeams, and Art said, he stopped me and he said, "What are the lyrics right here?" And I was like, I don't know, something about a pug nose or something.
Pug nose dream. I beg your pardon.
Yeah. And he said, look, go home and learn the lyrics, and then we'll work on this again, And I thought, what is this? Is it because at the time I thought it must be because if it's like a love song and I understand the import of the song, then I'm going to play in this more loving way or I thought it was some kind of esoteric thing like that. Mm-hmm. And it's not like that at all. It's about phrasing. Mm-hmm. It's about if you're singing the in your mind's ear, if you're singing the song, you're going to phrase like a singer. You're going to play lyrically. Otherwise, you'll just take a breath when you run out of breath, and in the middle of a phrase. Also, you always know where you are if you're doing like a standard song form, like a 32 bar song. A lot of musicians are like, "Are we at the bridge yet? How many A sections have gone by?" But you'll know when you're at the bridge.
You got to internalize
the bridge lyrics in your mind. Let's ride with the family down the street. You're at the bridge because you're at the bridge lyrics. So it's about.
You're talking about the Flintstones.
Yeah, man. It's a practical. It's completely eminently practical. If you're singing that song in your head, you're going to play a different way. You're going to breathe a different way. You're going to follow the cadence. It's not going to be bop lick, blues lick, Miles quote. Stringing together patterns. It's gonna be. You're gonna be playing something that's either based on the melody, or you're gonna be jazzing the melody, or embellishing the melody, or playing a counterpoint to the melody. But the melody is gonna have this kind of architectural. Anyway, I don't mean to. It's just one of those things that I didn't really get it at the time, but I feel like I get it now.
Yes. I have to say that your music shows that you get it.
Thank you.
I do want to mention some of your current projects. Would you like to talk about? You did a project of Burt Bacharach music. Is this true, or you are doing?
Yeah. So every year, one of the things that's kind of a it can be a negative, but I've kind of made it a positive. That a lot of the presenters, like the concert presenters, they want to know sometimes 2-3 years in advance what you're going to do, what program you're going to play, like as if you're a classical touring, and jazz musicians, we like to decide that day what tunes we're going to play that night, and so that's kind of hard to do. So I started putting together these themed programs.
Oh, excellent.
So we would do like Jazz from the Silver Screen, or we did a film noir project.
I know that I should mention, you have an interest in film noir going back decades.
Yeah.
And I know that I was playing with you. You were writing, was it Ozone Park? Was that it?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. You were writing music that was filled with noir, had a noir, drenched in noir, I would say, drenched in noir.
Yeah. It's been a lifelong obsession for sure. But you mentioned Burt Bacharach. So I've always loved his tunes. And so I thought, okay, let's do a year where we just do arrangements of Bacharach material, and we did that all year last year.
Yep.
This year we're doing Stevie Wonder. We're doing a jazz spin on Stevie Wonder tunes, and these are like weapons grade earworms, man. They're really, really strong songs.
Well, Stevie Wonder is a fabulous composer.
Absolutely.
I mean, I got to say,
Stevie is a great example too of that thing of if you check out the bass line of these songs or the horn parts of these songs, they're like a whole nother melody. So it's just a way of conceiving of a pop song. It's not just about a hook, but it's about all of these melodies interweaving. Which
so if you haven't heard this in a while, the two versions of Too High, Joe Farrell's on Penny Arcade.
Okay.
With that Herbie Hancock Rhodes solo.
I don't know it. I'll have to check it out.
It's Penny Arcade, Too High, Joe Farrell. Okay. It's remarkable. It's actually and also, of course, Freddie Hubbard's live version on Gleam.
Yeah.
With George Cables.
Yeah, it's a great one.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of that one song, Too High.
Yeah.
I don't know what material you're going to do. You're probably going to do a lot of stuff, probably. What are you preparing, or what are you?
Oh, man. Well, hold on. I'll get the book and I'll tell you everything we've been playing. Okay? just a second. Give me a second.
Mm-hmm.
And everything was very clear. And, they need to talk about transitions or something. He would basically get together and on the sound check and talk down the set,
Mm-hmm.
He would say something like, we're going to do this one as a ballad and we're going to play 2 choruses. And at the top of the second chorus, let's have a bass solo and I'll come back in at the bridge. Everybody got that? Okay, good. And then they wouldn't even play it until the downbeat.
Mm-hmm.
But you're only able to do that when you've got someone like Fred Hirsch, like he was. I love Fred Hirsch.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Yeah, well, it's the caliber of musician is important, certainly.
Yeah.
And that's certainly the case with you, Dmitri Matheny. So you're in that company, and in that.
I don't know about that. I mean, I often feel like what I'm doing is a fan fiction. I mean. I just watched the Star Wars movie yesterday.
Okay.
And I came away from it with this really weird feeling, and it was something about it that reminded me of the music business, and I couldn't quite. I mean, first of all, it's fantastic. John Williams. Mm-hmm. It's basically a John Williams concert with a light show. That's how I could conceive it. But I came away from it, and I was like, no, wait a minute. Here's the deal. Wait, so Luke is dead, Leia's dead. Darth Vader's dead. Obi-Wan is dead. Yoda is dead. Mm-hmm. Han is dead. And I'm just supposed to suddenly care about all these new kids and their adventures. And then I realized that's exactly how that's how I feel about the music business.
Right. Sure.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to get excited about some of this new stuff, but still, I go back to these Booker Little records, and man. Booker Little on Candid, it has yet to be surpassed. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's
get off my lawn, said the grumpy old man.
Well, yeah, people do have a sense of generational identity.
Yeah.
And generational experience.
Yeah.
And of course, a movie as big as the Skywalker picture.
Yeah.
Which I have not seen.
Sorry about the spoilers.
Oh no, I don't mind. It's not. I just only mentioned that because I can't really speak with you about it because I'm ignorant.
Yeah.
I'm actually profoundly ignorant about that franchise because I have not been following it.
Yeah.
I've been following other things. Time is you got to only follow certain things. So.
Well, see, you have to remember that I identify with Luke Skywalker just as a whiny kid in the lonesome desert, craving adventure.
Sure. Well, because you were never whiny, but you were from a lonesome desert. I never saw you as whiny.
Oh, thank you.
Do you still have that dashika you wore? What was that?
Oh my goodness! You know what that was? Here's a true confession. Probably never said this any time on anything remotely publicly, and right now on your podcast, I had seen a photo of Elvin Jones in one of the jazz trades, like Downbeat or Jazz Times or something.
He wore that,
and he was wearing a dashiki.
That's right.
And I thought, hey, that looks cool. That looks like a jazz musician. I'm going to get some clothes like that.
Right. Sure.
And so, but I didn't realize, as like a 14-year-old white kid in the desert, I had no concept of like the kente cloth and like the what it represents to an African American and identity and the race issue. I had no concept. I just thought it looked cool.
Yeah, well, I only asked that because I was looking at the back cover of the Thad Jones Mel Lewis record.
Yeah.
Do you know the one at Potpourri?
Of course.
And I was looking at it, I thought Dmitri had that same top, had a top like that. And also on the Potpourri record, it gives everybody signs. So it'll say Jerry Dodging is a Leo and, Sir Roland Harris.
Bliss, man. I had no idea that I was copying black culture. I really didn't know. I mean, in one sense, my entire life has just been an exercise in cultural appropriation.
Yeah, that's of course that's very important. That issue is very important to people now.
Yeah.
It's interesting. My show is sort of about art making.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of my show is meant to be an alternative to other podcasts.
Yes.
Because other podcasts are very partisan.
Yeah.
Other podcasts are, for example, Ezra Klein or I don't know. I'm just picking names out of a hat.
Yeah.
Someone covering a controversy over a TV show.
Yeah.
So another podcast would be about the controversy of was the shooting of the affair ethical,
right?
Or that kind of thing. Or
hold on for introducing a moment of pop culture into this with the Star Wars reference.
No. I don't want to be misunderstood. No, actually, it's perfect because my show is about talking about the affair.
Yeah.
And Skywalker, but talking about it from the point of view of if there's somebody, somebody 24 and that's their second film, what it was like working with this particular director and this shooting script. So my thing is about that aspect of it rather than,
You're not leaning into the partisanship and controversy and all.
Yeah, I'm not as that's enough for another kind of podcast. I'm not interested in how many 50-year-olds like it versus how many 18-year-olds like it. Now that's the sociology of art. That's a very big subject in art.
That's true.
And it's an important subject in art.
Right.
But I'm kind of after more eternal matters, you might say.
Right.
So for me, it's
but on the subject of aging and being a musician and aging, I found myself recently in these conversations about certain of the younger artists right now that are getting a lot of play that play in this they use a lot of chromaticism, in their improvisations and in their melodies, and they're not so concerned about things like the chord changes of a song and the architecture of a song, and much more about the feeling of something and the groove, and then this sort of chromatic kind of playing. And I hear myself being dismissive of this stuff in the same way that I remember older people being dismissive of music that I loved when I was younger.
Yeah.
And going, okay, I have to take a step back and realize this is just this is my bias. This is a bias that's generational. And so now what I'm really trying to do when I do these workshops and I'm talking to a room full of college kids and I say, hey, what are you guys into? What are you listening to? And they say, oh, we love EDM music. I'll say, well, tell me about it. Tell me some good stuff to check out and tell me what it is that you like about it. Yeah. Like I really want to find out what that is and get at it as opposed to just dismiss it out of hand because, there are no 251s or whatever,
Yeah. I mean, it's, these are really just different styles.
Sure.
And styles have a dimension that has to do with fashion.
Yes.
And fashion can last.
Indeed.
As much as fashion can die.
Yeah.
Yeah, both can happen. So
you have a knack for classic dress.
That's a whole other subject.
You dress well, but you don't seem to be a fashion victim.
Well, I'm not as interested in that, really. I mean, I'm not as interested in conformity or in that sense.
Or what happens to be trendy.
Yeah, although I'm aware of it.
Yeah.
I have a lot of opinions about it. I'm very aware of it.
Yeah.
But sometimes you'd have to pull my leg or twist my arm for me to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because I'm also a Libra.
Uh-huh.
And astrologically, Librans don't want to offend anybody.
So you believe in that stuff, man?
Huh?
Do you believe in that stuff?
I personally do believe in astrology, yeah. But this is not the time to get into a... I'm the kind of believer in astrology that I've read everything debunking astrology.
Sure. Well, I don't understand astrology, and you know what Stevie Wonder says.
Is he into astrology? I'm sure he's into astrology.
Stevie Wonder says, when you believe in things that you don't understand, you suffer.
Okay. Well, that's okay.
That's superstition.
Yeah, that's right. So I think, I don't mean to, I'm not totally serious here.
Yeah.
I was just describing something about my person.
Libra.
Yeah, but of course, even if you don't believe that, you could say that diplomatic part of my nature comes from something else. It could be genetic.
So I'm a Capricorn. What can you tell me about my proclivities?
You're like Jesus. John Prine and Chris Christopherson. Eat organic foods and never wore no shoes. Funky bunch of friends, long hair. I reckon if he come around, we just straighten him up again. He's like, yeah, it's like the song, right? Jesus was a Capricorn.
All right. Well, I'll take Chris Christopherson.
Yeah. This has been a great discussion, Dmitri. And I'm really, I'm happy to have had you on this show.
Thank you, man.
We are going to have an extra music thing, if you were so inclined.
Groovy.
Do you want to? We're going to schedule that, and that'll be like part of this at the end. We will just schedule that at a different time when your instrument is cool, and let me know dates. And
yeah, man.
It'll be very brief and short, but it'll be musical and it'll be improvised, and we'll get to hear a live. We'll get to hear the Dmitri Matheny sound live.
Well, as best as my little snowball podcast mic can pick it up.
Okay. So, Dmitri, is there anything else you want to add in 2020, a new year, about music or about flugelhorns or anything else?
Well, I just hope you and I get a chance to see each other, man.
Yep.
You know, it's been too long.
It has been a long time. We're going to do this in I guess, in Washington, right?
I would love that.
I've never been there.
It's nice, man. You gotta appreciate green and rain.
Uh-huh.
And you know, it's often wet here and lush and it's very different from other parts of the country, but I love it.
Well, I live in the mountains now, so I'm
How do you like that?
I both love it and dislike it.
I think of you as an urban animal, man.
I am an urban animal, but I'm not living.
I picture you in the cafes talking to strangers.
Well, I still do that here, except there aren't any strangers. So there's no strangers, and there's
that's the problem.
There's no strangers, but
everybody knows everything about everybody.
Everybody knows everybody, and there's a lot of rain. So the reason I thought of this is that you talk about rain. Yeah, it's been raining for 48 hours straight here.
That's heaven to me, man.
Oh, you love rain.
I love it.
That's interesting.
My dad, when I was a kid, he would say, "Son, it's raining. Let's go." And we'd go out and walk in it.
It's important.
Yeah, and so we did that in Georgia and Tennessee, but in Arizona, you can't do that because sometimes you'll be the only vertical thing out there, and you don't want to be out there in a rainstorm with the lightning and whatnot.
You know, I really hate to say goodbye, but it's coming. All good things come to an end.
Yeah, baby.
So what do you want?
It's a lot of fun.
Anything else you want to say before we go? Because it's your...
Oh, gosh. Not really, man. This has been terrific, man. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to playing your piece.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be mostly free, and you're going to have to use your ears. And so basically it's going to be in the department of a little less planning and more feeling.
I'm down like a clown, Charlie Brown.
Okay. Thank you, Dmitri Matheny. Go see him anytime he's in town. Go see Dmitri Matheny. You'll never hear a sound like his, and it's just one of a kind. Thank you.
Thanks, Mitch. You're a prince. Right. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.